I'm good. Right now. I'm really great. By the end of this episode, I may be curled in the fetal position, crying and wrapped up in a blanket. But you know what? I'm doing good. So why am I scared? Why am I concerned? Well, tonight's topic, if you saw when you clicked on the podcast, is none other than Fulcrum Leader, the game that I co-designed with Ben Chi, who conveniently is not here. No, I intentionally let Ben enjoy his family vacation rather than dragging him in the middle of a family vacation onto the podcast. But there was rumblings on the interwebs. There's people who respect the viewpoint of Lead Pursuit podcasts. And they said, I want to know what those Lead Pursuit guys have to say about Fulcrum Leader. So congratulations, gentlemen. I will turn it over to you to ask the tough questions about Fulcrum Leader and where we are.
Well, first of all, why are you nervous, Doug? What are you nervous about?
I'm nervous because my reputation as a brilliant podcaster is going to be tarnished by the questions I can't answer.
Oh, no. Oh, well. Okay. How did you get involved? How did you get invited? I'm just interested. How did you get involved with Dan Burson, and how did you get involved with Fulcrum Leader?
Oh yeah, that's a funny series of things all mixing together. So I've been playing DVG games for a while. I played the original Fulcrum the original Hornet and Thunderbolt Apache Leader years ago when they were GMT titles. Really enjoyed them. Had picked up Hornet Leader and Phantom Leader and kind of played through that, and had been talking with Kevin and Dan Verson, and then talking with Ben Chi a little bit about just some add-ons to Phantom, some Marine Corps specific South Vietnam campaigns or how to do things like that. And so I'd interviewed Dan a couple times, and then kind of in the middle of all that, I interviewed Ben Chi about one of the Warfighter modules he's working on, Warfighter Mediterranean. And about that time, Ben's like, hey man, I've been thrown this project. I know you like Russian and Soviet aircraft and are fascinated by that. Would you like to help me co-design a leader game for Soviets? And I said, what's it based on, Ben? Big question mark. He goes, oh, it's based on Hornet Leader. And I said, Ben, I hate Hornet Leader. I fucking hate that game. and Ben was taken aback. And I'm like, it's a good game. I just don't enjoy playing it. I've played the old one. I really liked the old one. I played the new one. I really don't like the new one. What do you want out of me, man? So it started a long discussion about, well, do we change things we don't like? What will Dan let us do? And I think out of sheer curiosity, I signed up to help Ben with the project as a co-designer. And to Ben's credit early on, he said, hey, this is a project between the two of us. This isn't me making all the decisions and you doing all the work. But I had to, like, every step at the very beginning, remind him, go, Ben, I don't like this system. This isn't my game I take off the shelf every month and play. This is a game that sits on my shelf, and I've pretty much stopped playing Hornet Leader at that point. And it was only playing Phantom Leader every once in a while. I said, I like Phantom Leader, but there's things about it that rub me the wrong way. But I certainly like that a lot better. And I think it was right at that point I picked up IAF Leader, or Ben encouraged me to pick up IAF Leader, and I found a Jet Leader game that I enjoyed. I said, here's what I need. Something with challenge, with options, with, things that don't feel like they're arbitrary. And really enjoyed playing IAF at that point. So that kind of all built into then being suckered into designing.
Mm-hmm. So how much leeway were allowed when it comes to, because the fact that you're dealing with the Soviet Air Force and different doctrines, different ideas, completely different in a way from the way that, Western pilots were flying, as is shown in Hornet Leader, Phantom Leader, or whatever. What did you think was the most important changes that you wanted to make?
Oh my gosh, there was a long litany. This is where Doug rolls out the 40-foot scroll with all the things that I wanted to change. But what I will say is to step back to one point you made, what I had to remind myself, because this is why I hated Hornet Leader, is this game is not about doctrinal employment. It's not about tactical employment. It's not about flying the airplanes the way the airplanes would be flown. I would love you to recount the favorite comment that people always say about me, Roger, about why I shouldn't be allowed to talk about jets.
Doug, you're just too close to the subject. Too close.
Exactly. And that is a valid criticism. So that's a valid criticism about me not liking Hornet Leader, is that I want the Hornets, the Legacy Hornets and the Super Hornets, to shine and to do well the things they do. And the game system doesn't support that, which is okay, because what is the game? It's an asset management game. It's not a game to teach you why the Super Hornet might be better in some regimes than an A6, or why a Legacy Hornet might have outdone an A7. Those are all things that are flavor, but aren't really represented well. As you see, if you go on any of the Board Game Geek forums, people are flying and winning the game with F-14s and A6s instead of using modern multi-role fighters and multi-role jammers. Yes, Steve. Oh, Steve's got a question.
So that brings me to kind of a question that I just wanted to throw out there for anybody who might be unfamiliar with the Leader games or with any of the series of Hornet Leader, Zero Leader, any of them.
Right.
What is, like, I think everybody knows they're solo play games, right? What is the scope of the game? Is it you are a pilot? Is it you are you leading the flight? Are you leading the fleet? What is, like you said, it's an asset management game. Just kind of an overview of what the player experience is in a Leader game.
And I'll deal specifically with what we have colloquially called the Jet Leader series, Hornet, Phantom, IAF, and now Fulcrum and Eagle, because those play differently than Zero Leader and Corsair Leader and Stuka Leader, the World War II series, that sometimes become a little more granular. And now Mustang Leader has really become granular because they've changed some mechanics. Generally, in these Jet Leader games, you command and I'll put it in air quotes, a squadron. That squadron is made up of between 8 to 12 airplanes of different kinds. So it's not like your standard, like, let's say, U.S. Navy squadron in Hornet Leader. You aren't flying all 8 Legacy Hornets, all 12 Super Hornets. Your squadron represents the assets you can draw from. So you might have 3 Legacy Hornets, 2 Super Hornets, a Growler. At some points, you might have an F-35 or a couple A6s in there. If it's even earlier, some A7s and F-14s. So it's an amalgamation, and maybe you could call it a carrier air wing, but you don't have to represent things in the numbers like a carrier air wing. But it's your pool that you draw from, and every day you fly 1 or 2 missions against randomly drawn targets. You encounter surface-to-air sites, anti-aircraft sites. The focus is somewhat tactical, but because it doesn't get down in the weeds, other than in a very rock, paper, scissors shotgun, or in this case, it's rock, paper, scissors, harm missile kind of way, you don't get it super tactical into it. So sometimes it's called an operational game. I loathe to call it an operational game because I don't feel you're making operational decisions. You have one economy, and that is your special operations points. And when you run out of those, you lose the game. So it's not operational balancing truly targets versus assets. You're burning through your assets and you're trying to hit all the targets before you run out of assets. There's not a apportionment of aircraft and stuff in the way like an operational level air game would be.
You have to be careful. You have to be careful. You don't make it sound too much like it's a spreadsheet game of just basic asset management.
Yeah, well, but the funny thing is, some people view it very much that way. I mean, this is a point we're going to hit at some point in here is everybody comes to playing a leader game with a different goal in mind. And if you go on Board Game Geek, there are people who have spreadsheeted out the aircraft, the munitions, their relative effectivenesses, and to them it is a spreadsheet game. To them it is, I'm going to pick the best airplane with the best munition to take on specific targets and get the highest victory points possible. Doug would answer that it's a solo game, so there's no leaderboard for getting the most victory points. That's how I play it. And how I play it is not necessarily how other people play it. So I as a designer, I have to be respectful of the fact that people approach games with very different goals and methods of play. And this is always one of the things that's a huge drama in the 40K community, in the bolt action community, in any gaming community that has a breadth of play styles, is that you get people that go, I can't believe you play it that way. Why would you make this an asset management game? This is a tactics game. And then I'm over here like, this isn't a tactics game. I want to play it as an asset management game. So as a designer, I had to realize I was not going to please all those people. I was going to have to sprinkle a little bit of things for both. But I knew that as soon as we released it, someone would take those numbers and condense down all the hard work of making narrative flair into a spreadsheet line. And it wasn't going to be about, how did you feel when you selected this airplane? Is this airplane the deadliest airplane in the game, or is it a decent value for the amount of points you're spending on it?
It's definitely a personal approach, because I look at those games very much from a narrative perspective. It's telling a story, and it's telling a story of a squadron, a group of pilots in a particular campaign or whatever. And, you can actually get to, worry about your individual pilots. You actually want to see certain ones. They get their own little, they get almost like their own little personality and the way that the whole campaign goes. And also the enjoyment of saying, yes, you can work out exactly what is the best plane, what is the exact best mix of ordnance for this particular mission. But actually, I might decide I want to actually fly a MiG-21 for this one, or a MiG-17, or whatever, because it's more fun. It's part of that experience. And from the Hornet leaders, from the leader game perspective, that's where the side I definitely come in from. And I liked Fulcrum Leader simply because there was an added level to it with the political aspect, the Zampolit and thing, which was nice, and it just made telling that story just that little bit better. So I from my perspective, that hits the right keys.
I think that is the side that Ben, Chi, and I came from, and we truly said this. While this is an asset management game, people play it to tell a story, and people play it to make, at some level, an emotional connection with those pilots. Now, in Fulcrum Leader, we did our level best to cut some of that emotional connection because they don't have call signs, as many of the Soviet pilots did not have personal call signs, and they were identified by what we would call a rocket call sign in the U.S., where you had a specific call sign for your squadron or for your asset, and then lineal numbers went along, and you were number 41, 42, much like the Lucky Snipers, VMFT 401 out in Yuma, Arizona. They have Sniper 1 through Sniper 31, 32, whatever, however many pilots they have that they can draw from. So we wanted people to make an emotional connection, and our way of playing the game was to tell a story. That also was probably one of our biggest downfalls, because we didn't want to constrain how people could tell the story. We felt that Hornet Leader and Phantom Leader really put you kind of on rails in some ways. And we said, well, we want people to choose. Do they leverage their political leadership and the Zampolit to build up their SO points or to build up their assets, or do they opt to spend a lot of money, and do they opt to bring in squadron assets and support aircraft? And the problem is, when you do that, when you give people more choice, you open yourself up to imbalance. And that's where I feel the game is today, is that it's not balanced as a hardcore war game would be. We've given people so many choices that if you're that optimizer, it's very easy to find the perfect way to maximize the number of bonuses you get and points you have and all of those things. But once again, if that's how you want to play the game, then that's great. I would also say it's up to you to make it more difficult. take some of those assets away, take away some of those bonuses, and the difficulty will come up. But I wanted a player, and Ben and I both wanted a player to say, do I want to hit the target myself, or do I want to spend points and bring a strategic bomber in? Do I want to, use the Zampullet to possibly influence my own pilots and make them better or worse? But when you do that, you open yourself up to imbalance.
Because it seems to me, looking at the various reviews of the game, various comments of the game on Board Game Geek and on the person sites themselves, is that the issues generally are coming from the other side, from the asset management side of things and the game complexity. I've not really seen much in the way of people saying, the storyline that storyline side of things doesn't work right. It doesn't feel like I'm actually participating in some sort of a campaign. So I think that probably reflects that you probably did the right thing as far as looking and focusing on that story side of things.
Well, I would hope so, but there's an interesting counterpoint to that. I would say there are a few people that weren't expecting where the story is going with Fulcrum. And they expected Fulcrum to be written from my perspective as a former Western Marine Corps aircrew. It isn't. It isn't written with the things that I know now about how Soviet era equipment is. It is written with the Soviet propaganda in mind, and that you are a Soviet pilot, you believe this is how your systems work, you've been told this is how your systems work. You know in some ways they're inferior to Western systems, and you believe that other ones are superior to Western systems, whether they really were or not. You look at the game, and the Su-27 carries a lot of long-range missiles, and it can kill things pretty easily. The reality is, in the late 1980s, the Su-27 was a piece of shit. Its radar did not work. Its engines were unreliable. Its ergonomics were terrible. The Su-27 went on through the rest of the Su-30 series, to be an amazing aircraft. But in 1989, the Su-27 was a piece of shit. And so that's not reflected in the game. And several people have asked me, they've been like, oh my God, this doesn't feel like what the Soviets should be sending mass waves of aircraft and they're all dying and the West is victorious. And I go, that's not the game we wrote. We wrote the game that the Soviets are struggling. They're fighting for the workers of the world. If you're a MiG-21 pilot, life sucks for you. If you're, a MiG-29 or an Su-27 pilot, then life is good. And that fit a lot of design decisions that we had to make about the capabilities of weapons, what numbers they would hit on, the ranges of weapons, all these kind of things, because we didn't think it'd be very fun if your Soviet pilots all took off and got savaged by Patriot missiles as soon as they got airborne. Congratulations. Or as we've made I shouldn't say I specifically have made the point a couple times when people have asked, Soviets are very GCI reliant. Their GCI was going to be shut down in the first day or two of the war. It was going to be jammed, destroyed, hit with a Tomahawk land attack missile. Those radar sites were going to cease to exist, and the communications nodes were going to cease to exist after day one of any Warsaw Pact NATO war. And that's just a reality that we know now. At the time, the Soviets thought they were going to keep running via GCI. As they realized in the late 80s that wasn't going to happen, what'd they do? They built their AWACS. They really took the A-50, their AEW platform, and devoted it to the frontline battle because all that GCI was going to be gone. Minor historical diatribe here. Previously, the airborne early warning platform, the Tu-126 Moss, which is in the game, was really only used as a radar gap filler. That's another one of those narrative choices we made. We're like, what fun is that if you can't, in the early game, bring an airborne early warning platform? So let's take this airplane that existed, this real airplane, let's bring it into the game and allow the player to use it, even though we know that in 1978, that airplane was flying over the Arctic, filling radar gap coverages. But the things that we did there to make the game more fun, to give the players more choice, and to not necessarily be the most historical representation of a NATO Warsaw Pact conflict.
Well, I mean, where would be the fun in playing Fulcrum Leader when you are devastated in that first turn?
And play MiG-21s, that will happen to you. But
yeah.
fly.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's very similar to sort of reflection of 1980s style war games and the like, and viewpoints of the Soviet Union and its armed forces, and whether it was going to be you were going to portray a game where it was terrible and Western super fighters were just going to sort it out, or else you gave a great mystique to Soviet air power. It's untried. We don't know. The Su-27 looks brilliant. It's an eagle, isn't it? It's and the same with the MiG-29. I remember going to see the first visits of MiG-29s and coming across to the UK, and it was fantastic to see until you got up close and saw all those rivets.
Yes. So I tell a lot of people that it's an interesting point that when you've read all about these airplanes and you've studied them in minute detail, as us rivet counters do, and the first time you sit in a Soviet cockpit of a MiG-21, an Su-22, a MiG-29, and you do a walk around of the airplane, it is very different than a NATO Western aircraft. Even from the time frame, you walk around an F-104 and you can practically cut your hand on the wings, and the surfaces are smooth. You get to a MiG-21 that is also a rocket engine, basically, with a man stuck on the front of it, and that jet engine, you suddenly realize, is in fact all the airplane. But oh my God, the number of bumps and lumps and antennas and things that don't exist on an F-104. And you suddenly go, maybe these planes are not the corollary that everybody thought they were. And it's the first time I had a walk around of a MiG-29A, I was in Hungary in 1999. And I remember vividly walking around the airplane, seeing dents in the airframe, seeing, like I said, rivets in places that on an F-15 would have been smooth, and walking around and looking in the afterburner section of the engine and realizing just how, I don't know how to say it other than manly it was. Yeah. How this was not an airplane with finesse. This airplane was built, as I've often joked, for Ivan the potato farmer to maintain it at a rugged airfield with a hammer. Not for like an F-15 that had highly trained mechanics who were maintaining this at a Western air base where if something went wrong, they could pull that avionics part and go to a clean room and work at a card level on those avionics. No. That was not how the MiG-29 was built. But at the same time, there's amazing commonality that I know you've seen sitting in the cockpits in the museum, where you sit in a MiG-21 and you go sit in a MiG-23, and things are roughly in the same spot. You can very quickly say, okay, I now understand where my armament panel is. I know where my radar repeater is. I know where my circuit breakers are. Those things are in about the same spot. My gauges, my flight instruments are roughly in the same spot. You go between an F-15 and a T-38 and an F-16, and those are all in different places. Different designers put them somewhere else. And it's a little jarring to sit in a cockpit that is not built for the aviator, but is built to overload him with information, like a lot of the Western fighters were.
Yeah.
All right, Doug. So, question about the bringing the game from like concept to like the actual delivered product.
Oh God, yes.
So like, I feel like you've been working on this game since I've known you. Pretty sure development of this started during the Obama administration, right? So what were some of the challenges from a game designer standpoint, right? You, the designer, who obviously doesn't control the realities or the logistics or the specifications needed for production, right? So, we see a lot of the posts online about, the chits are loaded with this much information. And when you compare DVG chits to, old Avalon Hill chits, ours look like this, theirs look like this. When you compare this to, so what were, from the designer relaying the information to production, what you wanted on the stuff, what the production people were kind of saying, like, this is what we can put on just that relationship and how that kind of worked throughout the entire process?
Sure. So the first thing I remind people, and there are some individuals on the internet who will say, this is an excuse, we don't accept it. That's cool. Okay. I'm telling you the truth, and I'm telling you the constraints I operated under. Whether you think it's an excuse or not, that's up to you. I was playing in someone else's sandbox. I was very graciously allowed by Dan Verson to take his baby, Hornet Leader, and then Kevin's baby, IAF Leader, that they both worked on almost unilaterally. Holly obviously did help balancing in some of the stuff in there. But take their system and play in their sandbox. So the first rule that I ran up against very early on, full head on into like a bull, was that this was not my game. This was Dan's game. Ben and I were being allowed to design on top of it. So there's a lot of constraints that you run into with that. You run into constraints of things have to look the same. So when Hornet Leader or IAF Leader has already kind of filled up the counter with symbology and numbers and things, you have to follow that format. You break that at peril of two risks. One is Dan looking at it and going, you're not going to do that because that looks stupid. This is still my game and my company's imprint. But you also then run the risk of confusing gamers when you say, oh, we changed things. And so there were a few key things we had to change and some new keywords we had to add in because we ran out of space. And that's the best way to say it. We ran out of space on the aircraft cards that we added so much different types of ordnance and munition to the game over all these expansions that suddenly we ran out of space in the card because we were fixed in how much space you could devote to the text of what weapons does an aircraft carry. And as we all know, there's a diminishing point of returns. I keep making the font smaller and smaller. And then all of the gamers like myself break out the reading glasses and go, I can't even read that with my reading glasses on. Which is how I think I feel about some Avalon Hill counters, where they have superscript numbers above the already small firepower values and things like that. So you run into a physical constraint there. And that physical constraint bedeviled Ben and I from day one of this project until the very end. And at the very end, we were trying to shoehorn text onto cards, and we were having to make decisions about, could we cut a word out and not change the meaning of the entire text that was in there? Because one of our big mantras was we knew we couldn't close every loophole, but we wanted words to be the same across cards, across the rule book, across everything, so that a player could make a value judgment. Because while Ben and I have been trying to be engaged in a variety of the outlets where people are asking questions about this game, there's going to be a point, probably next week, where I move on to other projects. And I'm not there every day, and I'm not constantly answering people's questions. So we wanted it to be somewhat consistent. Then you figure you do 7 expansions, a core game, and however many hundreds of cards that is off the top of my head. And that's tough. So that was one of our biggest constraints, was space on the card. And the last constraint that we fought the entire way, mostly in the game design phase, but also a little bit in the production phase, was what could be done within the realm of a reasonable amount of effort. Understanding DVG, at least on this project, had one card artist, had one aircraft and counter artist, and our core team had 2 people to lay out things and to work through. Fortunately, at least for us, I come from a photography background, so I'm comfortable with Photoshop. So things where we would have to normally push it to the game designer or to the graphic designer, I was able to say, build me a template, send it back to me, tell me the fonts I need, I'll download all those, and I will stick the information in there, and then we'll send it back and make sure it looks graphically correct. Then we'll proof it, then we'll play test it, then we'll go through all those things. That shortened the development cycle in a lot of ways. That was a good thing, but it still was a constraint that when you need campaigns done, when you need quick reference sheets done. You got to start from somewhere, because if you start with what I'm going to have, it's going to be a blank page. It's going to be black text on a white page. So that was a huge design constraint to us. And as I came to find out, anyone who's looked at the campaigns, there's a lot of information we tried to put on there. And I wish I'd made more of them double-sided. But that, too, was a little bit of a constraint from Dan, where he said, constrain your campaign to the front side of a sheet. That's what a leader series campaign is. You can have a few of them that are bifolds or 2 pages or whatever, but by and large, your main campaign is 1 8.5, 11 sheet of paper. So figure it out, designer. So that constraint hurt a little bit.
Did you? I was thinking in terms of, from my own personal experience, I tend to find that it's much harder, or I go with much more trepidation into developing a version of somebody else's game. Because not only are you potentially, stirring up new issues with rules that you might put in there, but also you're actually potentially messing up people's appreciation or understanding of the game they've got. And I think you've covered quite a bit of that in the way you've done. But if you had a choice and preference, what is your preference? Would it be to design something yourself from scratch, or to basically develop a different scenario or a different aspect of somebody else's game?
We'll give you the very naive answer if you'd asked Doug 4 years ago. Oh, I'd love to develop in somebody else's sandbox, take their game, because of how straightforward and quick we can make the process. That was a very naive thought, because just like you said, once you add a little bit of flavor or even make some minor tweaks, you really are branching out. And we hit both of those problems you alluded to. We had several playtesters who were leader series aficionados, and they assumed things. And you can even see it when you go out and you watch a couple of the playthroughs that are out on YouTube. Wayne Hansen the other day laughed at himself. He was talking about it. He goes, I've played every leader game that has ever come out. I know I do not put munitions on an airplane unless I look at the card and say, that munition is on the airplane. And yet in his playthrough, he put ECM pods on MiG-29 Alphas, which that version doesn't have ECM pods. And he laughed about it, because there's just certain things that you either do automatically because you've played the leader series of games, or the other side is you've now made something confusing. It doesn't follow the same series of mantras. And we kind of did both in Fulcrum to the detriment of the game. And I will say that very clearly. And I don't say that to bag on what the final product is and to be super negative about a product that Ben and I spent years working on. But one of the realities is you have to read the rule book, and you have to be very precise about understanding how some of the rules, the wording may just change slightly. And there's wording we changed to make things easier. And when you do that, you re-level the playing field, and somebody says, but wait, it used to say this in Hornet, Fulcrum, or Hornet Phantom, IAF Leader. Yeah, it did. And in an attempt to make wording consistent, we changed that paragraph because of the following loopholes. And you can't, I know some players have said, why didn't you provide a design document? That's great. If I were making a technical publication, I owe someone a record of changes. That's what you do in technical publications. In a document like Fulcrum Leader's rulebook, that is a nightmare. And that's a bridge too far. Sure, it's great. Would love to have done it. Would love for you to be able to open to page 75 and go, here are the 500 changes that are in this game, and here's the rules reference. Yeah, bridge too far. Sorry.
So this sounds, I know we've kind of discussed in our own circles about game design where nothing seems really new when you play a game, right? You're like, oh, okay, that mechanic is from, obviously I've played that in this game. Kind of sounds like that is where that happens, right? Like even us, it's almost like, man, I'd really like to design a jet game based around blood, like a jet blood red skies, right? And then when you think about it, you're kind of like, I don't really know if I want to design jet blood red skies as much as I want to take this. I want to steal, this, and this from Blood Red Skies and make my own game. Like that sounds.
And I think you're hitting on where Roger and I were with Beyond McAlley when we started that effort, and Roger and I kind of looked at each other and said, "What's the purpose of this?" And we said, "Well, to answer the community's desire to play Vietnam era and other era jet stuff, and in doing that, we knew we were going to make compromises. We knew we were playing in Andy's Blood Red Skies sandbox, and there were certain things we couldn't break and certain things we couldn't change." And that's always going to be a compromise. Sometimes it does make it easier. To be honest, in the early iteration of Beyond McAlley, super easy. We were literally just writing stats. We made some very basic missile stats. That was easy. And Roger and I, the naive people we are, which we shouldn't be naive, we're like, this will be good. This will satisfy the community. And then people got a taste for doing jet things and said, but what about X, Y, Z? And all of a sudden, we're writing cards for the F-14 and writing a swing wing trait card. So you have that game designer's mission creep where you're developing inside someone else's sandbox, but you go, crap, now I got to break the rules. And I think if you take the question, Roger, that you asked, you see something more from that, like in Beyond McAlley. It started very much playing in Andy's sandbox and staying to those constraints. And then as you and I talked about it, we just broke the air-to-ground system because we didn't like it. We looked at each other and said, do we like air-to-ground in Airstrike? We're like, yeah, it was great for World War II. It was great for the time, and it was great for several years ago when those rules were written. But if we want to do something different, let's just break the rules. And so we did. Takes it down the road of being a different game all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's that big jump from, I think, we've all tinkered and played with games, and I mean, in all the years that I've gamed, you buy a set of rules and you look at it and say, I don't like that, I don't like that, I'll change it, that's fine, and it's for yourself. And it's the same in a sort of design thing when you start from scratch and say, oh God, I don't like Air War, I don't like this, we want to have a game that we can play, our club or just amongst a few of us, and you can change and do all those things yourself. And it's a whole different way of doing things. But once it's sort of like where you're actually aiming for a wider audience or worse, a commercial audience, then, it changes completely. And you find yourself going down roads you don't want to go or making compromises you don't want to do. And I think sometimes it stifles it a little bit. I think we're probably all at our most creative when we're just doing stuff for ourselves, almost.
And that's a very good point, Roger. So thanks for bringing that up, because I hadn't put it necessarily in those words, that when you make something for a commercial product, it does stifle your creativity. And Ben and I went through that on a couple issues where we're like, oh, here's these great ideas. And Ben looked at me and said, okay, that's fine. The Kickstarter will probably not dwell on that expansion concept, whatever. You can run with it, but it's still got a smell, taste, feel like a leader game. So you see expansion 4, which was Doug's fever dream, that Ben looked at, and quite honestly, Ben looked at me and goes, I don't think I understand this. And I said, I'm sorry, Ben. It is what it is. Let's go with it. But I, at least in that sense, had an expansion where both Ben and Dan and Kevin let me just do my own thing. And it's an expansion. It's not the core game. It's not what people are buying in the big box. But it was like, what if you break a bunch of the rules? And what if you make intercept geometry matter? And what if you do a couple of these things to create a game that feels very different? And is it perfect? Oh no. And it sucks terribly. And it's an attempt to do something fun with some constraints of another rule system, but the interceptor rules, they play like a very different game. They don't play like your standard jet leader game. So it's interesting. You can do things like that in expansions. You can do it in small indie games. You can do it in fan-based content. It becomes very confining when you do that in a commercial project, especially a commercial project that has a lot of other games in the series, because the expectation is they will play and feel a lot like it. And I think some people have gotten away with doing very well with that. Whether you want to throw spears at the level of errata or changes or updates to Spruance Leader, that's great. You can say whatever you want. But in that case, the designer has taken the Leader series and balled it all up, thrown it up in the air, and come back with a totally different game. And that's a good thing. But it does cause you to have to break the mold of some of the things you think about. And we'll see when Fletcher Leader comes out after Spruance Leader, so it's taking it to a World War II naval battle thing. We'll see how some compromises might have to be made there to bring it to a commercial product.
So yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Roger. No, I was going to kind of
no, you carry on.
Thought here. So if you had something to close that out, go ahead.
No, you carry on.
So I know Eagle Leader kind of released right around the same time. Is there a connection between those two games? Is there a way that, like, if I'm really into playing Eagle Leader and you're really into playing Fulcrum Leader, that we can kind of merge those together, have some type of solo games against other solo gamers? Or is that a thing, or is that just something that I would think would be cool in my own head?
And people have asked for that. And when we started the design process 5 years ago, I forgot how many years ago, quite a few years ago, we looked at it very quickly because Corsair and Zero have I'll call it a head-to-head mode, where you're playing both games, but you're making decisions in the other player's game. And to Chuck Siegert's credit, he opened up a great opportunity there. But the problem is, much like Hornet Leader Baseline, when Phil and Ben and I played through it, it didn't gel for us. It didn't do what we wanted in that head-to-head mode. It gave you some constraints and some opportunities, but we didn't feel like there was enough free play in it. And then rapidly, we were suddenly in the basis of having to get ready for a Kickstarter and deliver the basic core game that we had. And so we said, yeah, that is a bridge too far. We would love to do that. That's a cool opportunity. Never got there. There's a lot of things in Fulcrum that were, hey, that's a great idea. Like, pre-built squadrons and pre-built munitions loadout by squadron for certain tasks. Yeah, it didn't happen in Fulcrum. Would have loved to have gotten there. But what I would say to people who want to do that is, in a sense, it's very easy and you don't need another set of rules. What you do is every time you play through those games side by side, you have to play through the day incrementally. And when you get to the other person's interaction with the bandit, with the target, any one of those things, let them make the decisions. Let them roll the dice. Let them move the aircraft. Because the bot, the AI in the Jet Leader series is very basic. Bandits move towards you until they get to their maximum range. Then they stay there. They don't do all kinds of crazy things and fall back and move laterally, etc., whatever. So let the other player play that. And let them be the one that draws the angle of attack chits for their sights. There's ways you can incorporate those into Fulcrum Leader. Obviously, Eagle Leader, the rules have taken a slightly different turn in some areas. But as Roger said, this is your game. Nothing says you can't take angle of attack counters from Fulcrum or from Phantom and play them in Eagle Leader. You just house rule things and you build things on. So you could very easily make a equitable system where both these games could be played in a head-to-head mode. I think the other difficulty that comes out of that is what happens if both of you win. That's quite possible. But two units could both achieve their goals in combat because you're not in in Fulcrum and Eagle, you're not simulating these two squadrons going head-to-head and fighting. You're simulating they're both part of a larger conflict, and the Americans might satisfy their victory conditions, and the Soviets might satisfy theirs in the view of that individual squadron. That squadron did great. Guess what? We lost the war because the other squadron sucked. But it's a way to do it, but you won't get to a competitive win-loss. You won't get to the Eagle squadron lost and the Fulcrum squadron won. That's a totally different game. That's Red Storm. That's That's much more complicated.
Yeah, I guess conceptually I can kind of see that, what you're saying, right? So, like, if it's a whole big war going on, right, a whole big NATO Warsaw Pact war, it's very possible that this squadron over here, like, oh, they had a great day, they completed their objectives, and this squadron on the other side over here had a great day, right? And it honestly maybe doesn't even affect the whole war at all. Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like one thing that happened in the scope of the entire war might have absolutely zero effect, but they both satisfied their objectives. So that's kind of.
And I think that's the thing to understand about most of the Jet Leader series, most of the Leader games in general, is that campaign doesn't progress. There are a few campaigns that do. And in Fulcrum, there are several that we built to be multi-phase campaigns that progress. But generally, the only progression in a campaign in any of the Leader series is you're just continuing to draw from the target deck. There is no, oh, we're doing better. There's just, we're getting more victory points. There's not the tracks move to the right and they modify how many hits your targets have, or they modify how many sites or bandits may appear in the tactical display, but they don't really progress the narrative of the campaign. You don't come to decision points. You don't come to a point where you as a squadron commander are like, okay, now I am no longer flying close air support. I now need to fly deep interdiction missions. Those normally don't happen in those campaigns. There's a few where we did that, like in the Naval Aviation expansion 1. There's a very Red Storm Rising-esque scenario where you start off with crappy Yak 38s and you fly and you strike all these targets. And if you succeed in that phase 1 and phase 2, now you can bring aircraft from the mainland and you can build up your firepower, because eventually you're going to end up facing the U.S. carrier battle groups, and you're not going to do very well if all you have is Yak 38s.
So where did, like, overall scope of this, where did you wind up landing then? Is, like, if you've played Hornet Leader, if you've played Phantom Leader, is it like, all right, I understand 90% of these rules and it's little tweaks? Or is it, oh man, this is substantially different. I better sit down and actually read the rule book before I start blasting random questions on Facebook. Like, where
not
should
how we do
expect
things in this modern era. You ask questions before reading the rule book, and I laugh, and the individual will know who he is. I will not reference him by name, but I do laugh that there's one of the guys that I've been exchanging comments with. He's like, "Oh yeah, right. I should have read that in the rule book." And I'm like, "Yes, you should have." I'm happy to tell you the page that is in the rule book, but that question is directly answered in the rule book. But that's fine. I don't know many gamers today. It's different than it was in the 70s and 80s. Most of us don't sit down and read line by line and page by page and go exactly and come to an understanding of the entirety of the rules before we play the game. Most of us read some things in detail, skim through it, put some stuff out on the board, play through it, go on YouTube, see if there's a playthrough. I think today we have a very scatterbrained way of coming to an understanding of the rules. And like you said, what happens if you are a Hornet Leader only player and you walk into Fulcrum? Oh wow, it smells different from the very beginning. It is more complex. It has more considerations. You are going to ask questions if you don't sit there and read through the rule book and say, oh, this is what this means. And once again, rule books are written by human beings. There's some horrible inconsistencies in the Fulcrum Leader rule book that I wish I'd fixed. I wish Ben had fixed. I wish our editors hadn't introduced. But when you have a rule book that goes through a multi-year review process, there is always a risk that something is going to be introduced at the nth hour for the right reason, to help the player, to give the player more information, to make it obvious how to do this. That is a bad example. And like, I'll use an example. One of them slipped through about ECM pods, and specifically the MiG-29A. And the way the example reads, you could derive that the MiG-29 can use an ECM pod. And it was put in there specifically to help players understand that if you don't have ECM capability, you don't get ECM bonuses. But when you read that example, it could lead you to believe that you can put an ECM pod on a MiG-29 Alpha. And so I didn't catch that. Ben didn't catch that. It got introduced, late in the design cycle. But those are the things that you run up against. And I know Roger's got firsthand experience with that, where you're like, Mr. Helper Editor Man, just to make my life more difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just going back to the point you made there about the MiG-29A and ECM pods, the fact the guy was using ECM pods didn't break the game.
No, it didn't.
And indeed, I've watched games, some that I've been involved in and many that I haven't been involved in, where I've watched people playing the game and I'm thinking to myself, they're playing this wrong. They're playing really fundamental parts of this game wrong, but they're really enjoying themselves and there's no issues and no problems. And who am I to step in there and say, oh, actually you're playing this wrong?
I've felt bad and I've apologized publicly and privately to both of the YouTube individuals, to Wayne Hansen and then to Jeff, the guy who's done some of the playthroughs. I'm like, I'm not here nitpicking you because I'm not putting every correction in there, but here's some major things that might have changed the outcome had you played them the way the rulebook stated. And it's not thrown as a spear that, who are you to get this game wrong? I'm the designer and you're an idiot. No, it's I want people, when they watch the YouTube video, and thankfully YouTube allows you to time tag things so it pops up in people's view as they're watching the video, to know that, oh, there was an error here. And that's okay. Once again, if you play this game however you play it, Ben and I are not showing up to your doorstep and taking your copy of Fulcrum Leader away because you played it differently than us, or you didn't play the rule right, or you intentionally made a house rule. It's your game. Have fun with it. Do it. And if you get a rule wrong, I explained this to one of the people early on as they were doing some playthroughs, and they sent me some screenshots and stuff, and I said, hey, you did this wrong. This is how it should be done. They're like, oh, I need to restart the campaign. I'm like, no, don't. Just you suddenly realized that you played things wrong. Keep playing the campaign. It doesn't matter. Come up with a narrative reason. NATO sucked that day, and even though I did the die rolls wrong, I got an advantage over on NATO. Don't feel like there's only one way to play, and I think that is where much of the fighting between me and several other players has happened, because I've been trying to explain to them there's not one way to play this. If you say there's only one way to play through, and there's only one way to get to a victory condition, and there's only one way to achieve being the greatest player of a solo game that's ever been published, that's not what I want the rest of the community to do. That's cool for you, but don't put that burden on everybody else. Because if they want to cheat, if they want to re-roll dice, if they want to redo a chit pull, don't put the baggage on them that they have to do it your way, because it's their game. And
I do have to step in here, though, for a second.
Go ahead.
And I think this is
we going to talk about how toxic I am?
No. I think this is an important distinction. Actually, I can't believe I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to stick up for you in this moment of
should never do this.
I know. So, but there's a difference between doing something differently than the rules because it makes it more fun for you, or changing something, or making a mistake in the rules. That's very different to me than changing something, making a mistake with a core mechanic that changes the way the game plays, and then in turn saying, this game sucks, right? No, you changed it, right? So if you change it or you make a mistake and it sucks, then that's your fault. That's not the designer's fault. Right? By all means, change it all you want, right? Change it, do your thing, do whatever you want. But then it's kind of like, if you make the decision to change it, then you lose the ability to say this rulebook sucks. That's kind of where I stand with this.
And I'm going to pick on one of the YouTubers here, because there's an important point that he and I have discussed, is that, as I'm fond of saying, words mean things. And so when you say things without a caveat, or when you say things without explaining the situation that you're looking at them in, as Jeff was going through the cards for a lot of the aircraft, he's like, this aircraft sucks. I would never take this aircraft. This aircraft is worthless. It actually costs me, and it's got almost the same capability. This aircraft sucks. Then about 30 minutes later, he picked up some of the campaigns like, ooh, ooh, that's the only aircraft I can take in some of these campaigns. Ooh, I don't have enough, SO or other options to do some of these other things. Now I understand why that aircraft is there. Right. That aircraft is not a I will never take aircraft. It's if the smorgasbord of Fulcrum Leader is open to me, yeah, I'm not taking a MiG-21. If it is 1972 in Egypt, and all I have are MiG-21s and MiG-19s and Su-7s, yeah, I'm definitely not taking that MiG-19 unless I have to. But I got to take the MiG-21. So there's a lot of times people say things and they either are coming out of a position of their viewpoint. I'm trying to find the best airplane. I'm trying to find the most optimized airplane. I'm trying to find the game-winning airplane. Or, like you say, they get a rule wrong, and they just don't understand that in getting that rule wrong, they broke one of the enjoyable parts of the game. That happens. I'm going to get in trouble by saying this, and that's fine. File this under why Doug is one of the most toxic designers on the internet. Is a terrible person, and you should never buy any of his games. We have a core problem in the wargaming community, and I throw a spear at it with my crusade against Grognardism. But we have a problem that people want to complain first and learn later. And sometimes they don't even want to learn. That sometimes they will complain. You will explain the valid reason why you did something as a designer or whatever, and they'll come back with, well, that's just an excuse. Sure, life's full of excuses. The reason the B-2 hit the Chinese embassy might be an excuse to you, but it's a real world constraint that caused U.S. GPS-guided weapons to hit the Chinese embassy. So I think there needs to be humility on both sides. There needs to be mercy on both sides. And this is a point where I always screw the grognards over and say, hey, guys, I get it. You're a rivet counter. That's cool. I get it. You're the local expert on whatever airplane. That may not have been able to be represented in the game, or they might have made a coherent choice to not do that. There's some of those in Fulcrum Leader, and there's some glaring errors I just found the other day that I'm not going to call out here until someone finds it, because it's kind of an Easter egg, but it's also kind of a mistake. Then I looked at it, I'm like, oh God, I can't believe I still got something wrong. But it's not game breaking. I'm going to see how long it takes someone to find that Easter egg error, and call it out. And some of them are hilarious Easter eggs that people find. I'm trying to think of the one that just came up the other day. Oh, yeah. So the name of the airfield in Fulcrum Leader, that you get this nice little layout that you can put airfields on. Someone finally realized that that's not a Soviet airfield. And no, it's not. So it was one of the best pieces of Cold War looking airfield we could find, and it's not in the former Soviet Union, nor is it in Eastern Europe. So, yeah, there's little things like that people will get all up in arms about, and then they'll ask you, and you're like, no, we chose to do that. There's a reason. So, there's my diatribe. Worst designer ever, most toxic individual on the internet. Thank you very much. I run a podcast.
No,
yeah. At what point during the process did you say, I've had enough of this, I'm not going to produce this, this is never going to come out?
Like 70 times during the several years. Now I will say there's a couple times where we threw up our hands. And that happens between any group of developers, a designer, a design house, a publishing house. There's a point in negotiations where you're like, no, this is dumb. Take my name off the box. You can do what you want, but take my name off the box. And thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and we all got through those issues. Walked through the difficulties. But I think any rational human being is going to go through a point in any one of these game design evolutions, whether you're in your own sandbox or playing in somebody else's, that one of two things hits you. One of them is, like we talked about, it's the toxicity. People come out and they, for whatever reason, just want to bash you. And there is more bashing on the internet than fluffing. So let's just say that out there right now. There are more people that are out there telling you you're doing it wrong than people that are in your camp saying you're doing it right, and publicly saying you're doing it right, and publicly encouraging you. And that's tough as a game designer. So that's maybe why I fight back against the toxicity so much, is because I don't want other designers to suffer that. I want them to be empowered. I want people to go, ooh, that's an interesting choice. That's an interesting new mechanic, but sure, let's try it. Tell me how it plays out. So you have that, but then there becomes your vision of what you wanted the game to be and the reality of where you are. And I don't know, Roger, if this has ever hit you. I know, Steve, you and I on a couple projects have been to this point where you throw up your hands and you go, I can't get there from here. I can't get to what I wanted with what I'm given. Therefore, I feel like I just want to throw up my hands and walk away. And that's any project. I mean, that's my day job writ large. There's a point in multi-million-dollar aerospace projects that I go, I'm not going to get to what I signed up for 4 years ago. I want to just walk away. I want to change jobs. I want to not be affiliated with this project anymore. But that, I'll be honest, that's a little bit of cowardice. That's a little bit of arrogance. That's a little bit of saying it's my way or the highway. You're going to make those compromises and you're still going to deliver a product. And it's up to you as the developer, designer, lead engineer, to make it as successful as you can for the customer, the people who pay their money. But you're never going to, I shouldn't say never. I believe most designers don't end up delivering the product they really dreamed of. They deliver the product they can deliver.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I say, it's the difference again when you're talking about when you're producing something under a contract. So quite often you get picked up on a design. It's a subject you're not particularly interested in, but it's nice. They're giving you this contract. You set it. You'll follow that through, and in the end, you have to say, well, it doesn't really matter what I think. They're the guys that are paying for it. So let them take the flak, because quite often it's their decisions. They know better. They'll tell you, it doesn't matter, this is right, we're going to compromise on this card setup, we're going to compromise on this, and you're thinking, no, it's going to take everything that. But in the end, you just have to accept it. It's something you wouldn't accept yourself if you're producing it yourself, perhaps. But, it's one of those things, and it's avoiding the... Yeah, sorry.
It's pointless to argue. No. You're bringing up a good point that the internet is full of people who would do things differently than you or I or DVG or Warlord Games or Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast. You know what? The internet is full of people who want to tell you did it wrong. And that's great. That's fine. I'm open to the criticism. What is really asinine to me is people that have never operated in that space believing that they know more than you do. And that's where it becomes difficult. And that's where I think there's a lot of toxicity in some groups and not in others, which is interesting to me. That like the DVG social media pages were super toxic until DVG finally put their foot down. And that toxicity didn't exist in other gaming groups I was in, like the Starship Miniatures, rule set toxicity, or group that toxicity wasn't there. It's not in the Blood Red Skies Ready Room, so people are gonna laugh when I say this. Ken Nat does a great job of ratcheting down on that, and I've been a victim of his hammer a couple times. Trevor, we know, has been a big victim of his hammer. Steve might have been a victim of his hammer, but certain groups out there tend to either foster a sense of community or allow the inmates to run the asylum. And I think one of the problems is when people don't understand, first of all, what running a project is like. Roger, you and I come from backgrounds in project management and taking very high in the sky, wonderful ideas and having it meet the reality of how things have to be done. And that is a very specific skill set. And I was blessed by having a co-designer, Ben Chi, who is a project manager. And if anyone was going to keep Fulcrum Leader on the rails and progressing forward, Benjamin Chi is that guy. When people say, this is the most disorganized thing ever, I'm like, you have never seen Ben Chi's spreadsheet of progress and progress trackers and dates of delivery and all those things. But once again, you kind of hit the nail on the head. You fall into what a design house or a publishing house wants, and there's deadlines. And they say, that's great. You don't have any more time to develop this game and to fix those games and to play test that out and to find the perfect answer to that rules conundrum. We want this delivered now. And I think that was one of the biggest disappointments. Was we started with a good timeline. The Ukraine war happened, and we shelved this project. We walked away from it. We literally said, and I will forever be grateful to Dan for understanding this. We said we should not produce Fulcrum Leader right now that the Ukraine war has kicked off. We need to give it some time. It's a little bit raw talking about Russian and Soviet kind of things. And so he gave us some time and some space. But Dan, being a corporate guy and having a business to run, said, hey, this is a really cool title. I think this could be a success. So at some point, we pitched back in. You have a Kickstarter, you have delivery dates, you have all these things that have to happen. There is only so much time to make the perfect game, or to close all the loopholes, or to get all the playtesting you want. Here's an area that Ben Shee and I disagree a lot on. Ben believes there's a limit to playtesting, and he's probably right. I know in my heart and in my soul, he's right. I would playtest a game until the cows come home, and I'd never delivered it 8 years later. And in fact, that's what you see with a lot of games out there that have been in development for 10 years or more, is that people are play testing them to what they believe is the point of perfection. But there's also a point of, is it ready for a commercial product? And what do commercial products have? They have erratas. They have clarifications. That's the world we live in, that there's a point of number of revisions and acceptable errors. You've crossed that threshold, and now then it goes into publication.
And I mean, it's much harder in the social media world as well, where, you know, the erratas are coming out really quick and you have to respond really, really quick. Whereas in the old days, it was all about, you know, write to the company with a self-addressed envelope and you just ask for a yes or a no answer.
People are tired of hearing it, but I bring it up that a game could be in production and being sent out to distributors and to customers worldwide in the 1970s and 80s. And at the same time, a 4-page or longer errata was already there and already existed. And Magic Realm, one of the games that I love that is super complex, and I need to find a copy of it one of these days because I've since lost my copy from the 1970s. That game was 4 pages, 3 pages deep in errata by the time it was published. So in the general magazine, when they announce Magic Realm, our new, you know, wander through the forest and kill monsters and collect treasure, that game from Avalon Hill in that same general magazine had the errata published, and the game hadn't hit shelves yet. So there is definitely a immediacy now with social media of, I found something, you must answer it, tell me why this is wrong. And for us with Fulcrum, people forget that the game design piece of it was put on the shelf in 2023. No game design changes were made in 2023, and it's now late 2025. Everything after that was publication delays, was proofreading delays, was getting back into the DVG graphic design fixing capability, because when DVG is a couple people deep for graphic design and they have 6 or so games in production, big deal that you found an error. That's cool. That's great. You found an error. We're in the proofing cycle. You will now wait for these other games that are in the cycle somewhere ahead of you to be done with their graphic design work. Then the graphic designer will get to you and they will make your changes. So it's a very different world than the 1970s and 80s, where whatever, send a self-addressed stamped envelope and we might answer your question, or you might just have to figure it out yourself.
What gets me now is that when we used to find issues or problems, we get around it and we carry on playing. We just make those little changes. Now it seems that people are physically can't progress any further. They stop at that particular point. They find an issue or a problem, and they won't go any further until they get their question answered.
Yeah,
it's a spoon-feeding aspect.
I don't understand it, and I always have to remind myself that everybody comes in with different mental view of what the game should be, and we all have different ways of just interacting with even a solo game or 2-player board game. Comes back to my previous comment about mercy. I find myself having to sometimes have a little bit of mercy, but there's some things I'm hard over on. And I'm hard over on if you, player X out there, are telling everybody you should not play this game, then you better have really, really good demonstrable reasons why the game is broken. If your reason for you should not play this game is there's some card errata, maybe some counters are wrong, maybe the rule book isn't specific, maybe you can't win a campaign. If that is your reason for telling the vast majority of people that might buy this game or might play this game, you shouldn't play this game, cool, whatever. That makes you a YouTube voice like everybody else. Got it. I am going to push back against that. And I'm going to tell people, play the game if you want to. Do not let somebody else define your inability to play the game. It goes back to the moment when Steve and I were sitting there at Historicon, and the well-meaning Grognard came by and asked me, Blood Red Skies, does this game have a saving throw? Yeah, it does. It's called a dodge. Oh, I'll never play a game with a saving throw. And the discussion 5 minutes in was that the individual found that meant designers are lazy. Well, okay, that's cool. That's great for you. But if that individual stands up on the internet in a forum for that company's games and says, you should not play this game, it has a saving throw, that's just dumb. That's just dumb. If you say, I don't like this game because it has a saving throw, great, valid point, extremely valid point. If you say, I think the game designer was lazy and they could have changed the mechanics and cool, that's great. But when you tell somebody else you should not play this game, I'm going to say it right now, fuck off. That's your opinion. You should not gatekeep other people from playing a game because it doesn't meet your metric. That's a lot of self-importance, and that's a lot of you thinking that your way is the only way. If your personal metric for a game is 0 corrections, got it. That's cool. Whatever. Don't buy these games made by humans.
So where are we at with Fulcrum Leader? Is your role in this done? Is there more planned for it? Like where are we at? Are you going to be, you said possibly moving on to other projects? Where are we at with this?
So here's the first reality is I have purposely tried to be heavy on my interaction until the game gets delivered to EU backers, because that's where the biggest logistics hiccup has been. That there have been a lot of people in the US, people in Australia, people around the world have been playing, but the EU, due to some logistics screw-ups, did not get all their games to properly send out. So I have felt genuinely bad for EU backers that they don't have the game in their hands, they can't play it, they can't get that first months of interaction with the designer. But now that's starting to fade, and people are getting their games. So I think that the direct answer is in the near term, my interaction on social media and on Board Game Geek and things like that is going to fade over time. Some other people spend more time on Board Game Geek. My goal is that the community will have seen the questions I've answered, and that people that are just now getting their games aren't going to find something or ask a question that hasn't already been answered. And I think we've already seen it on Board Game Geek that in a couple times where I've just delayed and not answered a question immediately, other members of the community have stepped up and said, oh, that was answered either in this thread or this is what I've done. And I don't care if it's the quote unquote official answer from Ben and Doug. That doesn't have to be what people put out. But if people just interact and say, oh yeah, I ran into that problem and here's what I did. Here's my house rule, or here's how I answered that. That answers the mail to me. They don't need to hear, here is Doug's prescription for how to solve that rules conundrum. But to your second part of your point, there's a lot of other things I want to do. There's a lot of other projects that you and I have both talked about and worked on and have kicked around. And there's things that Roger and I have talked about and kicked around. And there's only so many hours in the day. While I will be very honest and say there's other content I could build for Fulcrum Leader, the question has to come out, why would I do that? Why would I continue doing that? Do I hate the product that I've created? No. Is it what I wanted? No. Is it where I wanted it to be? No. But it's a product that Ben and I carried through in its development. But I don't think you will see in the next year another expansion or a major revision. I think that is now in DVG's in their lane. If they want to revise the rulebook, if they want to incorporate all the errata into the rulebook and make some changes, they have editors that can do that. That's great. Cool. Make a version 1.5 of the rulebook. If they want to release an expansion, great. That's awesome. Ben and Doug have other projects and other things we want to do. Ben is obviously knee deep in some other game design projects that he can now devote time to. Now that he's not full time thinking about Fulcrum Leader. But I mean, even you guys know it, for the last 2 years, Beyond Mig Alley has really been my focus. So as Ben and I have been trying to husband Fulcrum Leader through the production side of the process and not the game design, I've been devoting a heck of a lot of time to Beyond Mig Alley. But Beyond Mig Alley is reaching an endpoint as well. It's reaching a point where I'm going to put that on the shelf, leave it on the website, put the cards out there, and look at the community and go forth and do good things. This is something Roger and I built to have fun. You guys can do with it what you will. And then Steve and I will turn to you on our other projects and and beat our head against the wall. But I'll be quite honest when I say this. There are several other projects that I originally thought I was going to do with DVG that I've taken those ideas and sent them to other people and said, hey, this would be a really cool idea. It's not for me to carry forward, but you've shown interest in that time period or that historical branch. Think about doing it when you're done with your current projects. Because what I've realized is that, like Roger alluded to, there's things you want to do playing in someone else's sandbox, and then the things you learn from that, you go, oh wow, I could go over here and try to do something different, and I'd like to do something different. I'd like to do something that isn't a leader game, that isn't a bolt-on to Blood Red Skies, that isn't an expansion of somebody else's game. But let's be honest, that's where designers really get a chance to try techniques and to try mechanics, is building onto somebody else's game. So can't really release any details here, but Steve and I and Roger have been discussing amongst ourselves other people's systems where they need aviation work done, and I'll leave it at that. So there's always possibilities there. I think for me personally, there's a lot of emotional baggage in Squadron Commander that Pat Doyle's working on, because it's in a sense a reinvention of things we did back in the 90s. And so that will probably be the next project I put a lot of effort into, because I want to see Pat succeed with that the way he has succeeded with Star Force Commander. And that goes back to the whole toxicity discussion. It's hilarious to watch Pat bring forth a indie rules set in the Star Trek, Star Wars spaceship combat arena, and see how supportive that Facebook group and that internet community and everybody was, as multiple rule sets were all coming out from different developers all at the same time. And it wasn't the toxicity, the why did you do this? There were a lot of tough questions. We're like, oh, that's an interesting rule mechanic. I don't necessarily like that, but okay, whatever. But it just wasn't the toxicity you see in some other game areas like GW or sometimes even Warlord Games. The who are you, the developer, thinking you're doing this? So I'll probably go play in that sandbox for a while with Pat and see where he develops things. I'll be honest, as a podcaster, you get drug into a lot of projects. Steve and I have been drug into a couple where we're like, hey, that's really cool. That's a fun game to play. That's your project. We're not going to get involved in that project. Fire on. But that's a good place to be. I mean, I think all of us would say that as game, podcast, design personalities, whatever we want to say, Roger, Steve, and Doug's role is in this wider internet. It's fun to be brought into people's projects, and it's fun to see people work through things and people come to you for your not necessarily review of something, but your input and your take on it. And that's fun. And then to step away and go, not my problem to solve.
Yeah, I can't.
Here's my salty comments.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like we're not getting rich over doing this stuff, right? So if it's not fun for me, it's just not really something that I'm gonna. I'm not gonna say like, oh, I can help you refine that game if it's not something that I'm interested in, or it's not like just a fun process, right? So it's kind of where to me, you got to strike that balance between stuff that is cool and stuff that'd be fun to work on, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there that I see that I'm like, damn, this is really, really cool. But then you're like, yeah, but I don't really think it'd be that fun to spend my time working on, right? And it's like kind of, it sounds the same, but when you actually get in the weeds and start working on it, it's not the same, right? So it's
and the reality is when you do any of it as a business, the fun ceases to be the primary reason. And I'll use this as a segue into Lead Pursuit podcast and 3D printing and 3D miniatures and stuff like that. That I am super thankful to our community that continues to buy our 3D prints, that continues to push for Steve, you to make more STLs of things. But it's a good place to be. But I'll be honest, when I'm standing in the storage unit looking at, a wall of stock and thinking, okay, I've got 17 hunters. Boy, I wish people would buy hunters, and I've got 0 MiG-21s. I'm like, I got to make a business decision here. How do I incentivize people to buy hunters? Because apparently nobody wanted to. No one's running Indo-Pac, whatever. You suddenly make decisions that are business related, not the fun of, all right, we're going to release 75 different aircraft this year. No, Steve, you don't have the throughput to do that. You would lose your mind making that many STLs. And yet there are people who are like, why aren't you releasing more STLs? Because Steve has a life. Because Steve would like to scoop horse shit for his daughter when she's riding horses. Yeah, he would like to be a part of her life.
Now, if it changed and we could get rich doing this, we can make it whatever you want to make. If somebody shows up,
exactly.
Let's be clear, right? If some independently wealthy person shows up and wants STLs, we wouldn't turn them away, right? I mean,
that's also the story of how so many game design companies got started, because somebody white knighted it and somebody put their money behind it. Hello, Warlord Games. And they put all of their heart and soul into something that might or might not have been profit making early on. And you see that. And I think this is going to be really philosophical, so I apologize in advance for this. There are podcasters who are happy, and I'm not judging them. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but they're happy to have a Patreon. They're happy to use various ways to bring in donation revenue. And I made the choice years ago. We weren't going to do that with Lead Pursuit Podcast. I made the choice that we were going to offer a retail store and we were going to make money the old-fashioned way. But that was also because I knew that our content creation timelines were not the same as some of these people who were able to go on Patreon and offer people value for their money. That wasn't, we couldn't do that with podcasts and exclusive behind the scenes and whatever. So what it meant was that we were going to have to schlep through having a store and packaging things in boxes and shipping them out to customers, but hopefully build a community of people that said, holy cow, these prints are nice. This is value. This is worth the money I'm spending, which, Steve, you don't see the reviews. Those only pop in my inbox. It is funny to me just how supportive people are of your STL work. They're very supportive of Chris, both Chris Bergeron, and Chris at Phalanx, for doing the printing, but they love your STLs. And Chris Bergeron and Chris Bennett both get great props for doing good printing, but it all starts because people love your STL, Steve.
I'm actually, Doug. I'm thinking we need to maybe have a brain mashup of this. If people want behind the scenes, I mean, I could do some behind the scenes footage of me. If people are ready for the raw, what that would bring
the raw
to them,
genius.
and they want a Patreon of that, I'm ready to deliver that to people if they want it behind the scenes.
The raw genius of you with a monster at 4 a.m, clicking your way through an STL as you're trying to make sure everything's all solidified and there's no gaps. Yeah. There's no need to see that behind the scenes. But no, it's one of those interesting things that at least for Lead Pursuit is this road you go down of being able to do cool things, do cool projects, but cool projects cost money. And so does game design and so does game publishing,
Right. Yeah. One last question though. Would you do it again?
God. don't know. And that's a cop out. I will say there's a moment when you're holding a product that has gone through so many hands and so many steps and has been produced and put into a box and is shrink wrapped and all those things. There's a moment of completion that you go, okay. But then in the back of your mind is that same discussion we had earlier of, well, I know I compromised on how I had to write this rule. I know I compromised on what I put on this card. I know I didn't get all of the aircraft in that I wanted. There's also a moment of, I don't know what to call it other than shame, where you're like, oh, it is a finished product. It is beautiful. It is complete, but it's not where I wanted it to be. So when you ask me, would you do it again? You do things like this for the fun of it, for the love of it, certainly not for the money of it. So my rational brain says no. My rational brain says absolutely not. I have learned that designing a game even in someone else's sandbox where some things are easier is not worth the thousands of hours, days, weeks, months, years, the heartache, the going through, the arguing with people on the internet, the enduring the slings and spears. It's not worth it. My rational brain says it's not worth it. But then your ego and the creative side of you goes, I did something. Yeah. I, with a lot of other people, and Ben and I working as co-designers and working with the DVG team, with 2 artists, with Dan, with Kevin, with all that is in DVG, with Sarah as our customer service interface, working with all those people, I brought something to fruition. So the ego side and the creative side goes, yeah, I'd do it again. I'll be an idiot. I'll waste all those hours of my day. But it's a very rational versus emotional decision that I feel like I can't answer that question. Someone would have to sucker me into it again. I go, oh, sure, I'll do it. And then 6 months into it, I'm like, didn't I say I wasn't going to do this again? So.
See Harrier leader. That's what you're.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, someone else is doing that. Thankfully, someone has already committed to saying, I want to do a South Atlantic Harrier leader game. And I'm like, good, knock yourself out, buddy. That will be a good one. But I think to really put a pin in it, you shouldn't go into game design thinking that it'll be a rose garden, thinking that it'll be a quick process, thinking that having an idea about how a game implements equates to game design. The battlefields of game design are littered with the corpses of people who had good ideas and couldn't bring them to fruition. And that's just the reality. And even role-playing games are the same. I'm looking at all the Dungeons and Dragons and Star Trek RPG and MechWarrior for BattleTech and Daggerheart and all Robotech RPG, all the RPGs that had a commercial flash in the pan. People played them, and I would be hard pressed to find anyone playing some of these other game systems anymore. So,
yeah, I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied. I definitely.
No, you're not.
I want to play it. Right? I want to play it. I've always been curious about the Leader series, right? The solo play thing, right? Because so for me, I like to play video games, which is kind of most of the time like a solo play experience, right? But I sit down for an hour and play a video game, and I always feel like, God damn it, I just like wasted an hour, right? So there's something like more cerebral to me about playing like a board game, or like that I feel would be at the end of that session is more satisfying than just like getting up from your couch and going like, oh man, I just wasted an hour staring at a screen, right? So I'm excited to play it. I'm excited to try it out. I'm excited for all the artwork. I think the artwork looks awesome, right? Like I
know where I can send my copy of Fulcrum Leader.
I feel like everything I've seen of it, I've really liked, but I haven't played it, right? So, but I'm excited to get it in my hands and give it a shot for sure.
You know, it's one of those difficult things to rationalize the way people come to playing solo games. I didn't used to be a solo board game person. I used to play a lot of 2-player games solo, as a lot of us do. You play both sides of it, but I never really understood the the interest of a solo war game, because to me, I equated wargaming with fighting a human opponent who was real time introducing chaos into the problem. But there is a fun to it. Just like, to me, it's when you look at the Leader series of games, they are an asset management game with a veneer of a theme over the top of them. Whether it's Tiger Leader, Sherman Leader, soon to be T-34 Leader, I'm a tank commander, I'm doing things. Sure, it smells like that, but underneath it, the crunchiness is asset management. Hornet Leader, I'm commanding a Navy squadron, but that's cool. Yeah, you've got a bunch of aircraft, but it's really asset management with this flavor over the top. And what I had to realize was that there are people who play games for the flavor, not for the crunchiness. And it was hard for me to understand, because I look over at my war game section and I see Advanced Squad Leader and Third Reich and some of these really hardcore hex encounter games that Steve just can't even imagine touching, much less playing. But I realized I played those for the crunchiness, not for the theme. I played it for I have taken, a rifle company of Marines, and I have advanced through the beaches in Squad Leader, and I've done whatever. That's not what you get out of these games. And so these solo play games are very narrative focused. And I think that's what I always had to remind myself, is that a lot of people are just telling a story and using the game engine as a way to play out that story in their mind. And that's both freeing some ways for rules mechanics. It's also burdensome for others, because you've got to make sure that people can understand the story they're telling. Which, side note, the funniest part, and I realized it this morning as I was thinking, I have come to a point finally, after designing and working with Ben on Fulcrum Leader, that I natively think about Soviet era and Russian munitions with the Russian nomenclature. In my brain, they are R-73 missiles. They are not AA-11 Archers. In my mind, they are, R-23s, R-24s, R-27s. And it's funny for me that's easy now for me, but yet I also have to remember that players coming into this game for the first time, they're going to have a hard time getting the nomenclature correct. And that's why there's an entire munitions piece at the back end of the rule book. And it's just this constant reminder that it's really easy for me now, all these years into it. But at the time I was like, okay, what is the name of that missile again? KH-23. What the heck is a KH-23? Yeah. Welcome to the narrative. Tell Russian stories. Tell Soviet stories.
And if you're going to get into a game, honestly, I'm not. Fulcrum Leader is really good. It is.
I'm glad you liked it.
I just love the background. It drags me to it simply because of the setting. It's just it's non-conventional.
Well, I'm glad you like it. And there's a point. There is a little bit of emotional baggage as an aviator that I put in it, that I having known some former Warsaw Pact aviators personally, there is a belief that I feel like their stories weren't told, and their stories in the fact that we beat the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union in the Cold War, that people don't necessarily understand their stories and don't understand or want to understand what they went through. And aviation's aviation. I laugh when I tell people this. I remember meeting my friend Shandor, a Hungarian MiG-21 pilot, and spending a lot of time talking to him. He gave me a tour of Su-22s, of MiG-21s, and talking to him about it and saying, what do you think, Shandor? He goes, oh, I've been around the Hornets. You would have absolutely blown us out of the sky, but we still would have launched. And any day, even today, I would meet you over the airfield, me and my MiG-21, you and your F-18. Because aviation is aviation. And I, even with the difficulties of the Ukraine war, the difficulties of politics post-Cold War, I believe those stories need to be told. And I believe that this is one of the ways that you, in your mind, tell those stories, and you understand that aviators had tough decisions. We didn't have a Zamplet. Their squadron commander had to decide, this isn't the right crew for the mission, but the Zamplet tells me I have to fly the party boss's son in this mission. Or the Zamplet tells me I have to take some of my supplies and bribe some of the regimental and division leadership, because they need to be paid off. Those are all stories that are out of the heart of the Cold War that I think need to be told. And I think it's unfortunate that, at least as Westerners, as Western Europeans and Americans, we don't necessarily know the constraints that Soviet aircrew flew under. So, in a sense, mission accomplished with doing that. Certainly not mission accomplished with creating a highly accurate simulation of Cold War era combat. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys doing this reverse interview, I guess, putting me as the host in the hot seat. Steve, you totally softballed me. You gave me a pass. I was expecting a good Steve rant here, and I'm so disappointed.
I'll save that for the behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
Shirtless.
Extra.
I'll do like
Patreon.
a shirtless, drunken, maybe like, a playthrough tutorial of the game, right? Just like 2 a.m. in the morning, bags under the eyes, the whole deal.
Exactly. That would be perfect, because that would fit in with some other internet channels and their playthroughs. But yeah, no, I appreciate you guys doing this. I hope this will answer some of the questions that were out there. I hope it's also a kind of funny riposte to those who are like, I really want to see the Lead Pursuit podcast, dissect this. Well, you realize one of the designers is the host of the Lead Pursuit podcast. So it's a little hard for me to be perfectly fair in this, but I appreciate you guys at least trying to bring out the things you like, things you didn't like. And I think that there's a lot to be said about internet community. And I think this circle that we have amongst the podcast and our friends like Roger, it's great to have the community to say, hey, here's some really good things you did in the game. And Doug, what the heck were you and Ben thinking when you did this? So while you guys may not have always asked me and put me on the hot seat for certain questions, like why does the R27 have a range of 3 instead of 2? No, we're not going to have a close discussion of the.
Who cares? If you want it to have a range of 3, give it a range of 3. If you don't want it to have a range of 3, don't.
Yeah, Roger is always the voice of reason here. You can't be the voice of reason. Someone's got to be the Grognard. I guess we're defaulting to Steve in the bonus content. We'll have to be the Grognard.
If you
dissects all this.
If you can imagine the amount of flack that Mike and I took over penetration of bloody rounds of ammunition in the war. And yes, I've got the exact examples that came from the Aberdeen Proving Ground. And no. So why did you do that? Because it felt right.
Yeah. That's the answer you want to say sometimes, because it felt right. And I have to that point, because I know one of our YouTube friends is going to come back and go, but this was the thing that I was hung up on. And I get it, brother. I'm sorry. I know you may not like the way we modeled certain missiles, but you got to make a decision. And you got to decide how to model them. And there's game design decisions you make that you go, this isn't exactly how things worked, but it's going to make the player feel like a Soviet pilot in 1989 pulling the trigger on this missile against those dirty NATO imperialist capitalist pigs. Maybe I got it wrong. That's fine. Sorry.